Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me at the back? I'm a bit paranoid about the sound after this morning's unfortunate mishap. I'm very, very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Let me just say that I speak from a perspective, I'm not from an audit background, not from a compliance or legal, in-house legal sort of background. So some of the things that I talk about today may come across as a little out of left field. It comes from areas of practice, basically serving in leadership on 2 IPCs, as well as my own research on largely Christian organizations, but in the course of which I've also spoken to leaders of other faith organizations, right? So hopefully, and I can't hope to be comprehensive in about the 20 minutes or so that I'm going to speak, but hopefully it will spark some ideas for the panel discussion and for the Q&A, which is probably the meat of this session. So, to begin with, I guess one question is why bother with faith-based charities, faith-based organizations, right? Given that, as we will see, and as I'm sure many people here know, they cause all kinds of difficulties and pose all kinds of challenges. So why bother? This part, I think I'm preaching to the choir, as it were, so I'll go through it fairly quickly, but if it hasn't occurred to you, these are probably some of the reasons why we continue with this, right? It gives a common cause, a common religious cause, common religious foundation, gives a very, very impassioned reason for the existence of the organization, right? It's very easy to inspire. If you've ever been part of a non-faith organization, a secular private sector, public sector organization, you're leading it and you want to inspire, you want to rally your troops, right? How often you wish for a cause, a belief, that can do the job, right? And leaders of religious, faith-based organizations have this ready-made for them, right? Related to this, of course, longevity of employment, loyalty, right? Whenever staff members feel as though they're exhausted, they're running out of steam, there's always this other additional metaphysical, for want of a better word, beyond the sort of things, beyond the quotidian, beyond the things that surround them, a justification from the invisible realm, the supernatural realm, spiritual realm that inspires them, that gives them that kind of second wind that many organizations could hope for as a way of inspiring loyalty and longevity in their colleagues, right? It gives a common mission. So again, if like me, you hate mission statements, a faith-based organization has that one big advantage. It's much faster to come up with a mission statement, right? And of course, it also gives, this is where, you know, I'm with Harvard Business School professor Rosbeth Kanter always says that culture is the leading indicator of success in an organization. Not indices, but culture itself, not KPIs, right? Not quantitative things, it's culture. And religious causes, religious principles, foundations give a very, very strong basis to create a common culture that everybody in the organization can subscribe to. Furthermore, you get it's an easy sell to external stakeholders who are like-minded. So what I call the external stakeholders, right? It almost sells itself. In fact, so much so that referring to the earlier panel's discussion, you may have to be a little bit careful about people appearing. Many of us, I think, remember there was a genre of email scams, the Nigerian scams, which a lot of them began with appeal to faith. Many of them were appeals to Christian and Muslim faith. Right, so beloved in Christ, or you know, and then or a Muslim greeting to begin with, and then the promise to send you billions of dollars or millions of pounds or whatever it was, right? So again, it's such an easy sell that you have to be very, very careful about where the money comes from. In fact, but people of like religious beliefs, it's very, very easy to sell your mission to them. Many of them, in fact, approach you, and then you have that problem of distinguishing the legitimate from the illegitimate. And it has a wider social benefit as well, if done well. Because what it can do is it can create stronger social cohesion, social bonds with people of unlike faith. when you demonstrate the social benefits of your faith to others who are not fellow believers, right? So just a quick note that many of these things also obtain to many other causes which are not faith-based, or they may consider themselves faith-based even though they're not traditional religions. So for example, the environment, many people believe in that with a certain kind of vigor which is almost religious, right? Or children or animals. So it's the power of belief in general, the power of something which comes outside of material circumstances, outside of demonstrable KPIs, right? And that's where, of course, the problems, the dangers from faith-based organizations come from as well. And some of this will be familiar to you. If it is, maybe it's just an opportunity to rethink some of these. Some of this may be new, and then we can get into this in greater depth during the panel discussion, right? So, of course, the biggest concern is lack of diversity, right? The biggest issue is the temptation to justify a homogeneous board, in fact, many of the staff as well, simply from the fact that you have, it's a faith-based organization, right? So, it's a flip side of what we said earlier on. Faith gives you a very strong internal coherence, but it gives you a very, very weak external relevance when you're dealing with interventions with clients or beneficiaries, advancement and donor management as well. There's also the big potential perception of bias, in that people who don't belong to that faith group may feel they're victims of unfair practice. Whether in terms of hiring or advancement in career, in tendering, contract management, client relationships and treatment. There's always that reality as well as the perception that if only I belong to the same faith community, things would be different, right? So that's something, the perception is as powerful in many ways as the reality. It's something to worry about. The opposite side is difficult of loyalty for the people of the same faith group is, of course, difficulty in hiring and retention of people outside. So you're largely confined to your own faith community when it comes to a lot of things. Loyalty, donors, benefactors, external stakeholders, board members, right? The two are obviously flip sides of the same coin. Even as it's easy to hire and retain and inspire people of like faith, it's very difficult to get the diversity, get the loyalty, the buy-in from people who don't belong to that faith. In fact, you may have to conversely overcome a certain degree of suspicion, a certain degree of wariness from people who don't trust faith organizations or people who come from a different faith tradition. And I think one of the biggest issues really is point 4, governance relaxation. I think this is what keeps a lot of us awake at night, or it really should. Yeah, the assumption, as I said, it's something to do with how religious organizations operate at a kind of supernatural, and I break that word up very, very carefully, meaning above the everyday, above the material kind of dimension. There's always this justification of a spiritual or a supernatural invisible realm which seems to override every other circumstance, right? It's often called different things. It's called faith, it's called belief, right? But the very faith and belief which allows you to pull yourself out of a difficult circumstance is also the same faith and belief that can pull you deeper into a dangerous situation in spite of contrary evidence. So we can break this up into several sort of subgroups of dangers, right? One is, as I said, the invisible mission, universal mission syndrome, that you're working towards a cause, invisible, unknown, known to your own internal stakeholders and community, faith community members, right? And if it's known, it doesn't need to be talked about because we all share it, and therefore it's universal. And how about those who don't believe in it, those who don't subscribe to it? Well, they don't matter because they don't belong to that faith community. It becomes a very, very strong self-reinforcing cycle. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle that does not admit easily to contrary evidence to the contrary. So it just keeps justifying itself. It's like a rock that rolls down a hill, a very, very steep hill, and gathers a lot of momentum, gathers a lot of debris with it. It's very, very hard to stop. because, again, as I said, you don't stop it the way you stop other corporate decisions, which is evidence-based. This is super evidence, as it were. The second 4B is what I would call the spiritual leader syndrome. And this pertains, of course, to religious organizations per se, places of worship, organizations for worship. But of course, the whole problem with faith-based organizations is that much of the aura of those religious organizations also attaches to the faith-based organization if you don't do due separation and proper kind of separation of governance, right? So that the spiritual leader who justifies the worship organization, in a way, also justifies the faith-based organization which arises out of that religious organization. Right? And the trouble with religious leaders, of course, is that they, again, just like universal causes, they don't subscribe and they're not subject to the same kinds of material evidence to the contrary. There's actually just one, in my experience, one material criterion for a religious leader. You have to be reasonably popular. You have to be believed in by a large number of a body of believers. You have to have that kind of enough popularity, enough buy-in from a community of believers. But after that, it becomes, as I said earlier, a kind of self-reinforcing cycle, which does not easily admit to contrary evidence, right? As long as you have that physical body of believers with you, a lot of the things that you do cannot be dissuaded, cannot be overridden by contrary evidence. Because again, there's that universal belief that everybody in the community subscribes to. Then there's the good name syndrome, which is that, it's contra whistleblowing, of course, right? It's that temptation to cover things up because of the good name of the organization. Once you've invested all those things that we talked about earlier on, once you've got that momentum going, once you've got that large community of supporters and believers, there is that desire to keep that momentum going at all costs. Right? The problems that arose earlier on due to lack of proper governance, you want to sort of plaster over for the sake of the organization, and also not to reveal how obvious the governance lapses were, how horrendous the sort of misconduct could have been. Okay, so very, very quickly, I'm aware that these are like, idealistic sort of solutions, but just very, very quickly, again, for us to think about, yeah? Groupthink, obviously, diversity. I, however, recognize that it's very, very difficult to do in religious organizations, particularly at the board level, which is where there is a kind of justification for the fact that you do need people of like faith in order to get a certain kind of mission going, really. Yeah? But certainly for all other levels, diversity is crucial. And at the board level, what can be done, of course, is co-opted members. We had this in the Metropolitan YMCA. We had co-opted members on the board who gave us, non-faith-based kinds of justifications. They're always there to check our thinking, right? Subcommittees to look at particular issues to make sure that the groupthink, the lack of diversity doesn't permeate throughout the whole organization. Yeah. Perception of bias, of course, is about transparency. Yeah, very, very strong transparency criteria. And we know how this works, of course. We put up a kind of a list of job requirements, right? And it's all very, very transparent on paper. The job advertisement looks fantastic. But during the interview process, of course, somehow the faith factors come in again. And so there has to be transparency even in a final decision. It's very, very easy to go through a kind of superficial transparency, in other words, a kind of surface transparency, but really the transparency of criteria has to go really deep, all the way down to the justification, the written sort of reports about why a particular candidate was hired. Yeah. Okay. And difficulty in hiring and retention, I think some of these will be addressed if we take care of the first couple of points so that there is not that kind of bias a perception of bias, yeah, against people who don't belong to the same faith group. So I won't spend too much time on that. This is probably, again, the hardest thing to talk about and to do, yeah. As somebody said in the previous panel, a lot of this is mindset. It really is about wanting to change, wanting to have a much more transparent, a much more diversified culture. Yeah, it's much more than policy or SOP, because as we've seen, it's possible to circumvent policy, it's possible to circumvent job advertisement transparency, those kinds of criteria. And I think the crux of the whole issue is the need to separate the moral mission, enhancing mission versus the religious enhancing mission. Every religion, somebody once said this to me, I think it's absolutely true. We all subscribe to our own particular religion because we believe that that's the best religion, at least for us, right? Nobody ever said, oh, I think that the religion I'm in is a terrible religion. It really is a stupid religion, but I'm still part of it and I believe in it. Nobody ever says that, right? So it's perfectly okay to believe that your religion is the best for you, at least, right? If I may adopt a kind of a moral schema from the 18th century Enlightenment philosopher Adam Smith, the author of Wealth of Nations, right? Very few people know that he also wrote a book called Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in his Theory of Moral Sentiments, there was something that he said that was very, very applicable here. He said that in a race, everybody expects that you're going to go all out. I'm paraphrasing, of course, yeah? In a race, everybody expects that you're going to go all out, and it's perfectly permissible to do whatever is legitimate to try to win the race. But you always have to think of how the impartial observer will look at things. The impartial observer is somebody who's watching the race. Yeah? So if the impartial observer sees you running, training for a year before the race, he'd probably say, yeah, that's fair. Going all out, making every effort, special diet, special weight training, that's okay. But if you were to trip your competitor or push them out of the way, then the impartial observer says, no, this is not right. And I think that we have to keep that kind of impartial observer perspective always in mind whenever we're conducting faith-based activities. Right? Everybody believes that their own religion is the best one. Everybody wants to enhance the popularity, the appeal, the branding of their own religion. But we have to be, in our interactions with members of the other faith communities, we have to apply the impartial observer principle. We can't do things that would not actually be, would not be fair in the eyes of an impartial observer who doesn't belong to either of those communities. Right? So by all means, enhance the branding of your religious brand of faith, your religious community, but do things in a way that does not offend, doesn't give rise to tensions or problems with other faith communities, bearing in mind that there has to be a kind of impartiality, a kind of objective perspective to all this. Right? And that's very different, and so that's the religious enhancing kind of element. But at the same time, every religion, every major religion has a teaching about kindness. What somebody once said, that every religion actually has a version of the golden rule of doing unto others exactly as you have others do unto you, and not doing unto others the things that you don't want others to do unto you. Right? Every major religion has a teaching about humanity and humane treatment of other people. Yeah, including the people who have offended you, the people who hate you, your so-called enemies, right? Every religion has that. So how is it possible that every religion has a different cosmology, a different judgment scheme, eschatology, a different divinity schema, but all of them have a common pool of moral teachings, a lot of overlaps. So therefore, we have to focus on the moral overlaps between the religion in terms of our faith-based charities, and separate them from the religious enhancing elements, which is about propagating, again, your particular view of the cosmos, of the world, your particular divinity, your particular view of judgment at the end, and the particular view of who will be judged favorably and who won't be judged favorably. Yeah, I use Venn diagrams because there is an overlap. There is a kind of sweet spot in between the two. Right? And that's what faith-based organizations, in my perspective, should be doing. They should be leveraging the mission of enhancing their religious organization, but behaving in a way that enhances the moral component, which is a kind of common component across major religions. Right? So this will alleviate a lot of the issues that we talked about earlier on. And for the good name syndrome, you just have to, again, it's a mindset thing. You have to bite the bullet and have a really ironclad, independent whistleblowing policy. Again, I know cost is a big issue for many of the charities, so it could involve, again, instead of an independent auditor maintaining the whistleblowing kind of thing, a co-opted board of people outside the religious community who don't necessarily subscribe to the kind of sanctified view of the religious community, to manage the whistleblowing and manage it with all the usual criteria of anonymity, follow-up, taking it seriously, even reporting to the police if necessary, etc., etc. Right? A lot of details here. We can go into that a little bit later on if necessary. But in the interest of time, let me just conclude with this, and we can get down to the panel. Faith-based organizations have many strengths. We should maximize them for their own sake as well as for society's sake. Right? The key thing to me is that we have to segregate very, very clearly the religious enhancing mission of religions versus the moral and social enhancing purpose. I think it is possible to separate them. I think the big problem is that in our minds, we're never very clear. There's a kind of confusion of purpose, confusion of ethics when it comes to faith-based organizations, right? Certain procedures are, is no different from secular, public, or private sector organizations. They're all principles of good governance. It's just that I think there's a certain kind of inbuilt carelessness when it comes to faith-based organizations about those procedures. Yeah? And I just want to end with the thought that good governance does not compromise the faith element. Earlier on, again, the earlier panel made a very, very good point about reputational damage. This is what I always come back to. If these issues keep you awake at night, it comes down to this. It comes down to reputational damage. The kind of reputational damage that will be done if a lot of these faith-based dangers and challenges are not met head-on, are not met rigorously and strictly, and then something happens in your organization. Because it's going to be much worse than a secular organization that has actually made a mistake but has followed good principles of governance. If faith-based organizations make a mistake, it's often because of a lack of good principles of governance, because of all those errors that I talked about earlier on, those kinds of mindset errors, right? And the reputational damage is going to be horrendous consequently. So culture and mindset are the key and always the biggest challenges. Thank you very much.